The weight of $62 million feels lighter than the weight of a single broken promise. For years, I was the family ATM. But when my wife was dying, they vanished. So, when I won the lottery, I didn't see dollar signs. I saw an opportunity, a chance to finally serve a cold, hard dish of justice. This is the story of how I bought my freedom. Not with money, but with the truth. If you believe that true justice is priceless, hit that subscribe button. The old regulator clock on the kitchen wall was the only thing making a sound and in a som and when. It's steady. Deliberate tick-tock, counting out the seconds of my life in the thick, suffocating silence of 3 in the morning. Each tick was a drop of water on stone, slowly wearing away the night. Sleep was a distant country I no longer had a passport for. On the worn oak table, scarred with the history of 1,000 family meals, my phone cast a ghostly one-say. Blue-white glow. It illuminated the screen, and the numbers displayed there felt like a prank from a cruel god. $62 million. It was a number so vast it had no meaning. A string of zeros that looked more like a line of empty eyes staring back at me. This was the kind of money that was supposed to bring joy, liberation, an explosion of champagne corks and frantic calls to everyone you'd ever known. But as I sat there, the coffee in my favorite chipped mug, long grown cold, the only thing I felt was the crushing weight of it all. It wasn't a blessing. It was a burden. A $62 million magnifying glass that was about to be held over the cracked and broken parts of my family. The thought of them was inevitable. My son, Ethan, with his sharp suits and even sharper ambition. My daughter, Chloe, whose life was a carefully curated collection of perfect moments for public consumption. My brother, Richard, who could smell an opportunity the way a shark smells blood in the water. Telling them felt less like sharing good news and more like throwing a single piece of meat into a cage of starving wolves. I could already picture the glint in their eyes, that familiar, hungry light that always appeared when my wallet was open. I had funded that light for 30 years. No more. My mind, a traitor as always, dragged me back to the place I least wanted to go. 2 years ago. The last year of Eleanor's life. The memories weren't faded photographs, they were fully immersive. Multi-sensory experiences. I could still smell the cloying scent of antiseptic trying and failing to cover the smell of sickness. I could still feel the cold, unforgiving vinyl of the visitor's chair, where I'd spent more nights than in my own bed. The relentless, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor had become the metronome of my waking hours. That was when I needed them, not for money, just for them, for a hand to hold, for a shared silence, for a daughter to brush her mother's hair. I remembered the call to Ethan with perfect, painful clarity. I was standing in a small, windowless waiting area, the coffee from the vending machine tasting like rust and regret. He was in Las Vegas for a tech conference. And when he picked up, a wave of noise, thumping music, roaring laughter. The clatter of 100 conversations crashed through the receiver. "Hey, Dad." "What's up?" he shouted over the din. "You'll have to speak up. It's a zoo in here." His voice was strained with the effort of fitting me into his loud, important world. I could picture him, sleek and confident in a tailored shirt, one hand holding a craft cocktail, the other pressing his phone to his ear as he scanned the crowd, perpetually searching for the next big connection. "It's about your mother, son," I said, turning to face the wall to create a pocket of quiet. "The doctors. They ran more tests. It's progressing faster than they thought. They're talking about hospice care. The word felt like swallowing glass. It tore at my throat on the way out. For a moment, the only sound from his end was the party. It felt like he'd already turned away, distracted by something shiny. "Oh," he finally said. "Wow, damn, that's tough." "Dad." A beat of silence. "Look, I'm literally in the middle of a keynote speech after-party. My boss is here, and I've been trying to get a word with the VP from Syntech all night. This is a huge deal for me. Let me call you back tomorrow." "Okay, we'll figure something out." I knew, even then, that tomorrow would never come. I just whispered, "Okay, son," and ended the call, leaving him in his world of opportunity, while mine crumbled around me. A week passed. A week of holding Eleanor's frail hand, of watching her fade. I tried Chloe. She was closer, physically at least. She answered with her signature bright, airy tone, the one she used for clients and social acquaintances. "Hi. Daddy, is everything okay? You sound tired." "I am tired. Honey, your mom, she's having a very hard time. She barely eats, but she keeps asking for you. I was wondering if you could possibly drive down this weekend, just for a day. It would mean the world to her." The pause that followed was different from Ethan's. It was quieter, more thoughtful, but somehow colder. I could hear the faint, delicate clink of silverware on porcelain. She was having one of her dinner parties. I'd seen the invitations on her Instagram feed, an autumnal evening of farm-to-table delights. "Oh, Dad, this weekend is just an absolute nightmare." She sighed. The feigned sympathy, perfectly modulated. "We have the fundraiser for the art gallery on Saturday. And then we're hosting brunch for the Hendersons on Sunday. He's a partner at the firm. I simply can't cancel. It's all so stressful." She paused. "Tell Mom I love her, and I'm sending all my positive energy. I'll light a candle for her. I'll try to clear my schedule and get down there as soon as I can." Soon was a meaningless word from a language I no longer understood. She wasn't a daughter in that moment. She was a public relations specialist managing a minor crisis. Then there was Richard, my own brother. Born of the same mother. He lived 20 minutes away. I was beyond asking for visits. I was running out of money. The insurance company was fighting me on a new experimental drug that the doctors thought might give Eleanor a few more comfortable months. Pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. I called him Rick. "It's Oswald. I hate to ask. I didn't even have to finish." He knew my "I hate to ask" voice. He let out a long, heavy sigh. The sound of a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Oh, man. Oz, is it about money?" he asked, his voice dripping with practiced pity. "Sharon and I are just getting killed right now. The property taxes went up. The transmission on her car just went out. It's always something. You know, we're stretched so thin, I'm about to snap. I'd help if I could. Brother, you know I would. It's a really bad time. It was always a bad time. My crisis was always an inconvenience to their lives." I mumbled my thanks and hung up. The feeling of humiliation, a hot flush on my neck. That was the trifecta of my despair. My son, the ambitious networker. My daughter, the social strategist. My brother, the struggling victim. But the memory that truly carved itself into my soul came 2 days later. A soft knock on the front door. It was Eleanor's Aunt Carol. A woman in her late 60s living on a widow's pension and Social Security. She stood on my porch. her face etched with a genuine sorrow that shamed the polite concern of my own children. In her work-roughened hands, she held a thin, crumpled envelope. "Oswald," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I heard about Eleanor. I am so sorry for what you're both going through. This isn't much, but I wanted to help." She pressed the envelope into my hand. It was light as a feather. Inside, I found $200 in worn, folded bills. 5s, 10s, a couple of 20s. It was probably her grocery money for the month. I tried to push it back, my throat too tight to form words. But she closed my fingers over it. "Don't you dare," she said gently. "Family is all we have when the chips are down." After she left, I leaned against the closed door and slid to the floor. The envelope clutched in my fist. I wasn't crying from sadness anymore. I was crying from the sheer, staggering shame of it all. A woman with next to nothing had offered me everything she had, while those to whom I had given everything offered me nothing but excuses. Back in the sterile silence of my kitchen, that memory was a live wire. I stared at the phone screen. At the $62 million. It was an obscene amount of money. But it couldn't buy what Aunt Carol had given me for free. It couldn't buy loyalty. It couldn't buy love. And in that moment of searing clarity, the plan took root. It wasn't a scheme born of malice, but of a desperate need for the truth. For years, I had been the family's sturdy oak tree, providing shade and shelter. They had taken my support for granted, never once thinking to water the roots. Now, a storm was coming, and I needed to see if they would try to hold the tree up, or if they would just start sawing off the branches for firewood. I had to know, for Eleanor, for Aunt Carol, for myself. A new energy surged through me, pushing away the fog of fatigue. My movements became deliberate. I walked to the junk drawer by the refrigerator, a chaotic graveyard of expired coupons, dried-up pens, and all the little things that have no home. My fingers bypassed the clutter, searching for one specific item. There it was, a small, silver digital voice recorder, cool to the touch. I'd bought it a decade ago to record my thoughts on woodworking projects. A simple tool for a simple hobby. It felt strangely foreign in my hand now, its purpose about to be twisted into something much more complex. I slid the back open. The batteries were still good. I returned to the table and sat, placing the small device beside my phone. They looked like partners in a conspiracy. The heavy weight in my chest hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. It was no longer the anchor of grief. It was the anchor of purpose. The path ahead was dark and uncertain, but for the first time in 2 years, I knew which way to walk. I picked up my phone, the screen still glowing with that life-altering, family-shattering number. I navigated to my contacts. His name was at the top of my recent calls, a digital monument to my last disappointment. Ethan. My thumb moved with the precision of a surgeon. First, to the side of the silver recorder. I pressed the small, red button. A tiny LED light blinked once, then held steady. It was listening. Then, my thumb moved back to the phone screen. I pressed the green call icon next to my son's name. The sound of the phone ringing filled the kitchen, sharp and intrusive. Each ring was a hammer blow, forging my new reality. The test had begun. The ringing tone drilled into the quiet of the kitchen, each pulse a sharp, electronic stab into the fragile peace I had just found. It rang once, twice, a third time. I imagined Ethan on the other end, glancing at the screen, seeing Dad, and letting out a small, put-upon sigh before finally answering. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice a little rough, like he'd just woken up. Behind him, I could hear the faint, ambient sounds of a city morning, a distant siren, the hum of traffic. "Everything okay? It's early." I took a slow breath, steadying myself. The lie had to be perfect, not too dramatic, not too pitiful, just a simple, sad story of a man out of his depth. "I know. Son, I'm sorry to call so early. I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't an emergency." I let that hang in the air. I could hear him shifting. The rustle of bedsheets. He was sitting up now. I had his attention. "An emergency. What kind of emergency? Are you okay?" The concern in his voice was a thin veneer, the kind you use with a stranger who has fallen on the street. It was reflexive, not real. "I'm not hurt," I said, my voice carefully measured to sound weary. "Defeated. It's financial. Ethan. I made a mistake. A big one. You know, I put some of my retirement savings into that tech investment a while back. The one your friend recommended." I paused, letting him connect the false dots. "Well, it went belly up. Completely. They called it a market correction. I call it being wiped out." The silence on his end was different this time. It wasn't impatient. It was sharp. Analytical. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Calculating. Assessing. The first question wasn't, "Are you going to be okay?" It was, predictably, "How much?" "All of it." I lied, letting a tremor enter my voice. "The investment part. Anyway." And I had to pull from my main savings to try and cover the margins. "I'm in deep. Son, the bank called yesterday. I'm late on the mortgage. They're talking about foreclosure proceedings if I can't come up with $7,000 by the end of the month." There it was. The number, the bait. I waited. First came a sharp exhalation of breath, a sound of pure annoyance. Then, the laugh. It wasn't a loud, mocking laugh, but a short, sharp bark of incredulous disbelief. It was 1,000 times worse. It was the laugh of a superior being, observing the foolish mistake of an inferior. 7,000, he repeated, as if the number itself was an insult. Then came the words, from the blueprint of my plan, spoken almost verbatim, as if he were reading from a script I had written for him. "Seriously, Dad, at your age, you should have planned better. You can't just throw money at speculative tech stocks. Jesus, maybe this is a lesson for you in risk management." A leçon, my life savings, my home, my security, all reduced to a teachable moment for his 60-year-old father. The words struck me with the physical force of a slap. My knuckles turned white where I gripped the edge of the table. The cheap ceramic of my coffee mug felt like it might shatter under the pressure of my hand. But my voice, when I spoke, was a calm, quiet sea. The recorder on the table was capturing every syllable, and I would give it a clean, clear recording. "I know I made a mistake. Ethan," I said softly, "I'm not calling for a lecture. I'm calling to ask for your help. As a loan, I will pay you back every cent, with interest." "Dad, look, I can't just pull $7,000 out of nowhere," he said, the impatience flooding back into his voice now that the initial shock had worn off. "I have my own mortgage, my car payment, My money is all tied up in my own portfolio, which, by the way, is properly diversified. You have to be smart about these things. He wasn't just refusing, he was boasting. He was using my fabricated failure to highlight his own success. I'm sorry you're in this mess, but my hands are tied. Have you tried calling the bank to work out a payment plan? They're not interested in a payment plan, I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. They want the lump sum. Well, I don't know what to tell you. Dad, he said, his tone final. I've got to get ready for work. We'll talk later. The line went dead. He didn't say, I love you. He didn't say, I'm sorry. He didn't say, let me see what I can figure out. He just ended it. I slowly placed the phone back on the table. The little red light on the recorder was still blinking. A faithful, silent witness. I didn't feel anger. Anger is a hot, messy emotion. This was something colder, something heavier. It was the feeling of a final confirmation, the sound of a heavy door locking into place. I sat there for a long time, watching the sun begin to rise, casting long, sad shadows across the kitchen floor. A few hours later, after showering and dressing in old jeans and a faded flannel shirt, I called Chloe. She picked up with her usual sing-song voice, a melody designed to charm and disarm. Hi, Daddy. To what do I owe the pleasure? I went through the script again, tweaking the performance slightly. For Chloe, I played up the shame, the embarrassment. She was all about appearances. And a father, in financial ruin, was a stain on her perfect picture. I told her the same story. The failed investment, the looming foreclosure. Her reaction was a masterclass in superficial sympathy. Oh, my God. Dad. No. She gasped, her voice dripping with perfectly rehearsed drama. That's horrible. I can't believe it. You must be devastated. I am. Honey, I said, playing my part. I'm so ashamed to even be asking, but I don't know who else to turn to. I need to borrow $7,000. The temperature on the line dropped by 20 degrees. The dramatic actress was replaced by a cool-headed accountant. 7,000. She repeated slowly. The number a problem to be managed. Wow, that's a lot of money. Dad. I know it is. I'll pay it all back. He promise. Of course. Of course. She said quickly. It's just, my money is all tied up right now. We just put the down payment on the new SUV. And I have the deposit for the caterer for the foundation gala next month. The timing is just awful. She let out a frustrated sigh, as if my impending homelessness was a personal inconvenience specifically designed to ruin her social calendar. I understand, I said quietly. I mean, I'm so sorry. Dad? She continued, the fake sympathy returning. Look, I'm absolutely swamped right now. I have back-to-back meetings all day. Let me see what I can do. Maybe I can move some things around. I'll get back to you. It was the politest, most beautifully decorated no I had ever received. I'll get back to you was the kiss of death. The socialites' version of don't call us. We'll call you. We both knew she had no intention of moving anything around, except for maybe moving my request to the trash bin of her mind. Okay, honey, I said, thanks for listening. Of course, Daddy, keep your chin up, she chirped. and then she was gone. I felt a bitter smile touch my lips. One had lectured me. The other had managed me. 2 children. 2 different flavors of disappointment. I waited until late afternoon to call Richard. I wanted him at home. Relaxed. His guard down. He answered on the second ring, his voice booming with false bonhomie. "Oz, brother, how's it hanging?" I gave him the same story. But with him, I knew I had to play it differently. Richard didn't care about shame or logic. He cared about opportunity. I painted a picture of a man at the end of his rope. He laid the sympathy on thick. "Oh, man, that's rough. That's just terrible. Those stock market guys, they're all crooks. I tell you, they take good people like you for a ride." He clucked his tongue in disapproval. "So the bank is playing hardball. Who figuras? They are... Rick, I need 7,000, or I'm out on the street." He paused, and I knew this was the moment. This was where his real brain would take over. Safe and grand. "Geez, you know things are tight for me." Oz. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added the line that I knew was coming. The line that was the real purpose of his call. "You know, speaking of money, and the house, and all that, have you thought about downsizing? It's a big place for one guy. The market's pretty hot right now. You could probably sell it, pay off the bank, and have a nice little nest egg left over." He presented it as a helpful suggestion, a brainstorm from a loving brother. But I heard the subtext loud and clear. He wasn't just thinking about me selling the house. He was thinking about who I'd sell it to. I hadn't thought about that. I lied. I love this house. Rick, your mother and I, we built it. I know. And it's a great house. I'm just saying. You gotta think practical now," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "Just something to keep in the back of your mind." He promised to see if he could scrape something together. A promise as empty as Chloe's. And we ended the call. 3 for 3. The recordings were safe. The evidence was clear. But there was one more call I had to make. This one wasn't a test. It was a control group. It was a call to remind myself that decency still existed in the world. I dialed Aunt Carol. She picked up immediately. "Oswald, how lovely to hear from you." I didn't give her the whole story. I couldn't bear to lie to her that way. I just said I was going through a bit of a rough patch financially and was feeling overwhelmed. I didn't ask for a penny. Her response was immediate and without a moment's hesitation. "Oh, honey, don't you worry. You tell me what you need. I have my savings. It's not much, but I've got about $3,000 put away for a rainy day. It's yours. I can bring it over right now." $3,000. From a woman living on a fixed income, she offered it without question, without judgment, without a thought for herself. She offered it because she believed, truly believed, that family is all we have when the chips are down. Tears pricked my eyes, and my throat closed up. I had to fight to keep my voice even. "Carol." "No," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't hide. "Thank you. God. Thank you. But I can't take your money. I just needed to hear a friendly voice." We talked for a few more minutes about her garden and the neighbor's cat. The conversation, a soothing balm on my raw nerves. When I hung up, the contrast between her pure, selfless love and the cold calculations of my own family was a chasm as wide and deep as the Grand Canyon. Her kindness didn't make me want to call off my plan. It did the opposite. It poured fuel on the fire. It made the test more vital than ever. They were not worthy of being in the same family as a woman like her. That evening, he sat at my computer. The email I composed was short and to the point. I sent it to Ethan, Chloe, and Richard simultaneously. Subject: the house. Just wanted to let you all know that the situation with the bank has gotten worse. It looks like foreclosure is inevitable. I'll likely lose the house in a matter of weeks. I don't know what I'm going to do. I hit send. Then I leaned back in my chair and waited for the vultures to circle. It didn't take long. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Ethan. His voice was devoid of any warmth. It was the voice of a consultant dealing with a messy but necessary corporate downsizing. "Dad, I got your email," he said, skipping any pleasantries. "Let's be realistic here. You can't afford the house anymore. Fighting it is just throwing good money after bad. Not that you have any. Frankly, it might be time to start looking at some assisted living facilities. There are state-run places that are more affordable than you think. It's the most practical solution." He had already moved me out, stripped me of my dignity, and filed me away in a sterile, state-funded box. A practical solution. A few hours later, a text message pinged from Chloe. "So sorry to hear about the house, Dad. That's just tragic. If the worst happens, you can crash on my couch. For a little while. We'll have to set some ground rules. Of course, but you won't be on the street." The offer of her couch wasn't an act of generosity. It was a power play. It was a way to make me a dependent, a petitioner living under her roof, by her rules. The final sentence, "You won't be on the street," was the most chilling part. It was meant to sound like a reassurance, but it was really a reminder of my lowly position and her magnanimous charity. The final act, however, belonged to Richard. He didn't call. He didn't text. Late that afternoon, I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. I looked out the window to see his dusty Ford pickup truck pull to a stop. He got out and stood there for a moment, not looking at the front door, but at the house itself. His eyes scanned the roofline, the windows, the foundation. He wasn't seeing his brother's home, a place filled with a lifetime of memories. He was seeing a property, an asset, an opportunity. He knocked on the door, a wide, concerned look plastered on his face. "Oz, I came as soon as I could. I was so worried when I saw your email." "Come on in, Rick," I said, my voice flat. He walked past me and into the living room, his gaze sweeping across the space. He ran a hand along the fireplace mantel, tapped a knuckle against a wall. He was performing an informal inspection right in front of me. Finally, he sat down on the sofa, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, adopting the posture of a man about to deliver some very serious, very important news. He had a manila folder with him, and he placed it on the coffee table between us. "Look, Oz," he began, his voice low and confidential. "I've been thinking about this all day, and I want to help. I want to keep this house in the family." He let that sink in before continuing. "I've talked to my banker. I can take the house off your hands, pay off the bank, so your credit isn't ruined. I can give you, say, $50,000. Cash. It's more than you'll get from the bank in a foreclosure auction. It'll be a clean break. You can take that money, find a small apartment, and get back on your feet. $50,000. For a house I knew was worth 5 times that. Easily. He was trying to steal my home. And he was framing it as an act of brotherly love. He was a predator, disguised as a savior. I looked at him. I looked at the folder on the table that no doubt contained a lowball purchase agreement he'd had a lawyer draw up. I looked into his eyes and saw nothing but naked, bottomless greed. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I just sat there, letting the silence stretch. He started to look uncomfortable, his confident smile faltering. Finally, I leaned forward, my voice barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "I'll think about it." "Rick," I said. The recorder in my shirt pocket was capturing it all. "This is a big decision. Let me get everyone together to discuss it first. All of us. Here." Relief washed over his face. He thought my hesitation was a negotiating tactic. He thought my desire to include the kids was a formality. He stood up, clapping his hands together. The triumphant businessman who had just closed a killer deal. "Good man, that's the smart move. Oz, you let me know when." He walked out the door with a confident swagger, leaving the manila folder on my coffee table like a flag planted on conquered territory. He had no idea that he wasn't closing a deal. He was walking into a trap, and I was the one who was about to spring it. After Richard's truck disappeared down the street, leaving a small cloud of dust hanging in the late afternoon air, I closed the front door. The sound of the bolt sliding home was a solid, satisfying thud. The house was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the charged silence of a theater in the moments before the curtain rises. The stage was set. The actors had been given their motivation. Now, all that was left was the final performance. I spent the next day preparing, not with malice, but with the meticulous, detached focus of a craftsman. I didn't want this to be an explosion of anger. I wanted it to be a dissection, clean and precise. I moved the furniture in the living room, arranging 4 chairs in a semicircle around the coffee table, my worn leather recliner, their mother's favorite armchair, and 2 straight-backed dining chairs. It looked less like a living room and more like a space for an intervention, or an inquest. On the coffee table, where Richard had left his folder like a territorial marking, I placed a small, black Bluetooth speaker. It was unobtrusive, easily overlooked, but it would soon become the most important voice in the room. I showered and dressed, not in a suit or anything that would signal a change in my station, but in the clothes they expected to see me in: worn jeans and a faded, clean work shirt. I wanted them to walk in and see the same old dad, the broken man they had already written off. The contrast would make the truth land that much harder. I was calm, utterly calm. The roiling sea of grief and anger that had tossed me about for 2 years had finally stilled, freezing over into a solid sheet of ice. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I was a man with a purpose, and there is a unique and terrible peace in that. I had called them that morning. Richards made an offer on the house. I'd said to each of them, "I'm not signing anything until we all talk about it. Be here at 4 o'clock. It wasn't a request. Ethan was the first to arrive, 5 minutes early. A testament not to his punctuality but to his eagerness to get this over with. He strode in, already pulling out his phone. He didn't hug me. He gave my shoulder a brief, firm squeeze that was more of a dismissal than a greeting. "All right, Dad, let's make this quick," he said, his eyes scanning the room with a critical air. As if he were assessing property he was about to flip. "I've got a dinner meeting at 7. He sat in one of the dining chairs. Posture perfect, radiating an aura of impatient importance. Chloe arrived precisely at 4. A vision of carefully constructed sorrow. She wore an elegant, dark gray sweater that probably cost more than my monthly utility bills. She swept in and gave me a hug that felt like holding a mannequin, her cheek brushing against mine for a fraction of a second. She smelled of expensive perfume. "Oh, Daddy," she sighed, pulling back and holding my hands. Her brow furrowed in a perfect imitation of concern. "Are you holding up okay? This must be so incredibly difficult." She had brought a small potted orchid, which she placed on the mantelpiece, a little prop to prove she was the thoughtful daughter. She sat in her mother's armchair, crossing her legs elegantly. The picture of filial duty. Richard was the last to arrive, right on time, beaming like a lottery winner. He clapped me on the back. A hearty, booming gesture that felt entirely false. "Os Goodman, glad you're seeing sense," he said, his voice loud in the quiet room. He nodded at Ethan and Chloe, the benevolent uncle presiding over a sad but necessary family affair. He saw his folder still sitting on the coffee table, and his smile widened. He sat in my recliner, leaning back as if he already owned it. The conquering king taking his throne. The 4 of us sat there for a moment in the heavy hum. Expectant silence. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The old clock on the wall ticked on, measuring out the final seconds of their ignorance. I let the silence sit. Let it press down on them. Finally, I cleared my throat. All eyes turned to me. The show was beginning. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice even and quiet. They all had to lean in slightly to hear me. "As you know, I'm in a difficult position. And Rick," I said, nodding towards my brother, "you've made a generous offer to take the house off my hands." I paused, letting the word generous hang in the air, thick with unspoken irony. Richard puffed out his chest slightly. I looked at each of them, making direct eye contact. First Ethan, then Chloe, then Richard. Before I sign anything, I continued, "I just want to ask one last time. Is this it? Is this the best we can do as a family? Is there any other idea? Any other solution at all?" This was their final chance. A tiny, irrational part of me, a ghost of the father I used to be, hoped one of them would say something. "We'll figure it out. Dad, you can stay with me. We'll all chip in." But the silence that answered my question was absolute, profound, and more damning than any confession. Ethan broke eye contact first, pulling out his phone and checking for notifications. Chloe suddenly found a loose thread on her sweater to be of immense interest. Richard just sat there with a patient, predatory smile, waiting for me to pick up the pen. They had failed the final pop quiz before the exam even started. Their silence was the last piece of evidence I needed. "All right then," I said softly, and the sound of my own voice seemed to snap the tension. "I understand." Ethan looked up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance on his face. "So, are we signing this thing or what?" Like I said, I have plans. "Yes," I said, "we're getting to the signing." I didn't reach for Richard's folder. Instead, I picked up my cell phone. With a few deliberate taps, I turned on the Bluetooth and watched as it connected to the small speaker on the table. A soft, electronic chime echoed in the room, making them all look up in confusion. "What's that for?" Dad, Chloe asked, her head tilted. "Ambiance," I said simply. I swiped to my audio files, my thumb hovering over the first recording. Ethan's name was clearly labeled. I looked at my son, who was now staring at me with a mixture of confusion and irritation. I pressed play. My own voice, tinny and strained, came out of the speaker first. "I'm not calling for a lecture. I'm calling to ask for your help. As a loan." And then, Ethan's voice, sharp and crystal clear, filled the room. It was so clear, it was like he was speaking right then. But the words were alien, monstrous. "Seriously, Dad, at your age, you should have planned better. Maybe this is a lesson for you in risk management." And a moment later, "It might be time to start looking at some assisted living facilities. It's the most practical solution." I stopped the recording. The silence that rushed back in was horrifying. All the color drained from Ethan's face. His mouth was slightly open. His arrogant composure shattered into a million pieces. He looked from the speaker to me, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning horror. Before he could speak, I selected the next file. Chloe. Again, my voice, sounding so tired. "She keeps asking for you. I was wondering if you could maybe come down this weekend." Then came Chloe's voice, a symphony of insincere, melodic excuses. "This weekend is just an absolute nightmare. I'll try to clear my schedule and get down there as soon as I can." And then, from the text-to-speech recording of her message, "You can crash on my couch. For a little while. We'll have to set some ground rules." Of course. I stopped the playback. Chloe shot to her feet, her face a mask of outrage. The fake sympathy was gone, replaced by a raw, ugly fury. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "You recorded me. How could you do that? That's sick. It's illegal." "Is it?" "Chloe," I asked calmly, "is it more illegal than letting your father think he's about to be homeless so you can feel generous by offering him a temporary spot on your couch?" Before she could answer, my thumb found the final file. "Richard." My voice again. "I love this house. Rick, your mother and I, we built it." And then Richard's voice, smooth, predatory, and dripping with false concern. "I want to help. I want to keep this house in the family. I can give you, say, $50,000. Cash. It's more than you'll get from the bank." I let that last part hang in the air for a moment before stopping it. Richard was on his feet now, too, his face purple with rage. His folksy, loving brother persona had vanished, revealing the snarling animal beneath. "What the hell is this? Oswald," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You set me up. You twisted my words. I was trying to help you. You ungrateful bastard." And then, the dam broke. The room erupted into chaos. Ethan found his voice, stammering. I was just trying to be realistic. I was trying to protect you from making more mistakes." Chloe was yelling over him. "This is entrapment. You're a manipulative old man." Richard was shouting the loudest, his words a torrent of self-righteous fury and panicked excuses. They were no longer speaking to me, but to each other, a frantic symphony of blame and denial. I just sat there, in my recliner, and watched them. I was a rock in the middle of a raging river. unmoved by their frantic currents. They were exposing themselves more thoroughly than any recording ever could. They were tearing each other apart, their flimsy alliance of greed dissolving in the acid of the truth. When their shouting reached a crescendo, I did one final thing. I picked up my phone, turned the volume all the way up, and pressed play on a loop I had created. A lesson for you. Ethan's voice. On my couch. Chloe's voice. $50,000. Richard's voice. Over and over. The three phrases played, cutting through their shouting. A relentless mantra of their betrayal. A lesson for you. On my couch. $50,000. Their yelling faltered. They stopped. One by one. Silenced not by me, but by the echo of their own damning words. The room fell silent again. The only sound being the ticking of the clock, and the ghosts of their voices coming from the small black speaker. Their faces were pale, their chests heaving. They looked cornered, trapped, and finally, truly, exposed. I let the silence hang for a long, painful moment. Then I reached over and turned off the speaker. I looked at the three of them, these strangers who shared my blood, my children, my brother. My voice, when I finally spoke, was low and steady, but it carried the weight of a judge delivering a verdict. This, I said, my gaze sweeping over their broken, shocked faces, was test number 1. What would you do if I had nothing, you all failed? Epically. I stood up slowly. The movement was deliberate, commanding their full attention. They watched me, their eyes wide, as if they weren't sure what I would do next. I didn't walk towards them. I walked towards the old, locked cabinet in the corner of the room, the one where Eleanor used to keep her fine china. I inserted a key and turned it. The click echoed in the silent room. I opened the door and pulled out a worn, leather briefcase. I placed it on the coffee table, right next to Richard's now pathetic-looking manila folder. I clicked open the 2 brass latches. The sound was like a gunshot in the still air. They all leaned forward, a flicker of morbid curiosity in their eyes. What could I possibly have left? I didn't open it all the way. I just lifted the lid enough to pull out a single, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it slowly, deliberately, and placed it on the table in front of them. It was a certified copy, but the numbers were clear as day, printed in stark, black ink under the State Lottery Commission's official letterhead. A grand prize of $62. Ling ling ling. Ling ling ling. I let them stare at it. I watched the confusion on their faces curdle into utter, mind-numbing disbelief. I saw the gears turning, the frantic recalculations, the dawning, horrific understanding. Then I looked up, my eyes meeting theirs one last time, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. And now, I said, for test number 2, what will you do? Now that you know I have everything, the question hung in the air, heavy and sharp as a guillotine's blade. What will you do? Now that you know I have everything, for a full, stretched out 10 seconds. The only sound in the room was the frantic, desperate ticking of the old regulator clock on the wall, a sound I had blocked out, but was now deafeningly loud. It was counting down the seconds of their old lives, the final moments before their world fractured and reformed around the impossible piece of paper sitting on the coffee table. I watched them. I was no longer a participant in this drama. I was the audience. I watched the blood drain from their faces, A slow, sickly tide receding to reveal the pale, ugly truth beneath. I saw their eyes, wide and unblinking, fixed on the string of zeros on that lottery ticket. They weren't just looking at a number. They were looking at a ghost, the ghost of the fortune they had just so casually, so cruelly, thrown away. Ethan's jaw, usually set in a line of smug confidence, had gone slack. His lips were parted slightly, as if he had started to say something, and his brain had short-circuited. His meticulously constructed world of risk management and diversified portfolios had just been demolished by a $1 piece of paper and a dose of random luck. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life's work burn to the ground. Chloe's hand was pressed to her mouth, a gesture of shock. I had seen her practice in a mirror once when she was a teenager, preparing for a school play. Even now, in what was surely the most genuine moment of shock in her life, her reaction felt rehearsed. Her eyes, however, were real. They darted from the paper to my face and back again, wide, with a terrifying, animalistic panic. I could see the frantic calculations happening behind them, a high-speed emotional calculus of regret, terror, and a desperate, clawing desire. And Richard, my brother. His face was the most fascinating of all. There was no shock. Not really. There was a flicker of disbelief, quickly replaced by a look of intense, almost painful concentration. His eyes narrowed. He was a predator who had been stalking what he thought was a wounded deer, only to discover it was a dragon sleeping on a mountain of gold. He wasn't scared. He was recalibrating. It was Ethan who broke the silence, his voice a hoarse, strangled whisper that was nothing like his usual confident baritone. "Dad," he croaked, taking a half-step forward, his hand outstretched as if to touch the paper, to confirm it was real. "Dad, I don't understand." But he did understand. He understood perfectly. He was the first to find his footing, the first to begin the frantic, pathetic dance of revisionist history, his face contorted into a pained, earnest expression. "Dad, you have to believe me," he said, his voice gaining strength, gaining a asperity, pleading tone. "The things I said about the nursing home, that was just was tough love. I was trying to shock you, to motivate you. I saw you giving up, and I thought if I scared you, you'd get back on your feet. I was just trying to help, in my own stupid way." He was rewriting the past right in front of me, trying to paint his cruelty as a form of caring. And then came the pivot, the inevitable, nauseating shift from phony contrition to naked opportunism. "This changes everything," he said, his eyes now gleaming with a feverish light. $62 million, Dad. You can't handle that alone. You need a team, a wealth manager, an estate lawyer. We need to set up an LLC to protect the assets. I can do that. I can manage it for you. We can make this money grow. Secure our family's future forever." Our family. Just minutes ago, he was ready to file me away in a state-run facility. Now, we were a family again. Before I could respond, Chloe glided forward, her previous fury melting away into a puddle of shimmering, theatrical tears. The orchid she had brought sat on the mantelpiece, a silent, beautiful witness to her hypocrisy. She sank to her knees beside my chair. "A fallen angel in a cashmere sweater," She took my hand in hers. Her skin was cold. "Oh, Daddy." She wept. Real tears now streaming down her face, not tears of sorrow, but tears of pure, unadulterated loss. "I am so sorry. I've been so stressed, so wrapped up in my own stupid world. I wasn't there for you. I hear it now. In the recording. How awful I sounded." She squeezed my hand. "But we can fix this. This money, it's a blessing. It's a second chance for us. We can make up for lost time. We can take that trip to Italy you and Mom always talked about. We can buy a house on the coast. A big one. For all of us. Family is what's important. Daddy. It's the only thing that's real." She was trying to buy back my affection with my own money. She was selling me a beautiful, gilded future, paid for by the inheritance. She had been ready to deny me a warm place to sleep for. And then came Richard. He let out a loud, booming laugh that was so jarring, so utterly out of place, that it made Ethan and Chloe both flinch. He strode forward, a wide, predatory grin splitting his face. He clapped his hands together. "Well, I'll be damned." "Oz," he boomed, his eyes shining with a terrifying avarice. "You old dog, you had this ace up your sleeve the whole time. I knew you weren't down for the count." He wasn't even attempting to apologize. He was framing himself as my co-conspirator. "See," he said, gesturing wildly between the three of them. "I was just playing along. I had to make my offer look real. Didn't I? To see what these two would do." He winked at me. A grotesque, intimate gesture, and my offer on the house. That was just me trying to keep the vultures away. Brother, protecting your biggest asset. And now look at us. With this kind of capital and my business sense. Oz. We're not just going to double this money. We're going to build an empire. An empire, built on the ashes of his integrity. They stood there before me. A tableau of desperation. The pragmatist, offering a business plan. The performer, offering a fantasy. The predator, offering a partnership. They were a pack of wolves, fighting over a kill they hadn't made, a feast they hadn't earned. They had all, in their own unique and terrible ways, failed the second test. I raised my hand. It was a small, quiet gesture, but it had the force of a thunderclap. They all fell silent, their pathetic speeches dying in their throats. They turned to me, their faces a mixture of hope and fear, waiting for my judgment. I looked at Ethan. A lesson in risk management. I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "You were going to teach me a lesson." I turned to Chloe. "My place was on your couch," I said, "for a little while, with ground rules." I turned to Richard. $50,000. I said, "That was the price of our parents' home. The price of our brotherhood." I let the words settle. I let them feel the full weight of their own cheap, hollow hearts. "You don't get it," I said, my voice rising slightly, filled not with anger, but with a profound and weary sadness. "You still don't get it. This was never about the money. It was about what the money reveals. I gave you 2 tests today. 2 sample questions. The first was, what would you do if I had nothing? And your answer was clear. You would lecture me. You would discard me. And you would try to pick my bones clean before I was even dead." I paused, my gaze sweeping over their stricken faces. The second test was, what would you do if I had everything? And your answer was even clearer. You would lie. You would grovel, and you would try to latch onto me like parasites. You failed both tests. You are not worthy of my poverty. And you are certainly not worthy of my wealth. My money, I said, the words as final as a closing coffin lid, is not for people with no heart. I stood up from my chair. For the first time in their lives, they looked small to me. The meeting is over, I said, my voice now devoid of all emotion. It was the voice of a stranger. Get out of my house. For a moment, they were too stunned to move. They just stared at me. Then, the reality of the words hit them. Dad. No, Ethan stammered, taking a step forward. You can't be serious. I'm your son. We can get past this. We can talk to a lawyer. A therapist. There is nothing to talk about, I said, pointing to the door. Leave. Chloe burst into hysterical sobs, grabbing my arm. Daddy, please, she wailed. Don't do this. Please don't throw me away. I love you. I'm sorry. Her grip was strong, her nails digging into my arm. But her touch felt alien. You don't love me, I said, pulling my arm free from her grasp. You love what you think I can give you. Now get out. Richard's face had turned a dark, mottled red. You can't do this. Oswald, he snarled, his voice low and menacing. I'm your brother. Blood is thicker than water. Not this blood, I said, my eyes locking with his. Not anymore. Their composure finally broke completely. The begging turned to threats. The tears to accusations. Ethan started talking about lawyers, about declaring me mentally incompetent. Chloe collapsed into a weeping heap on the floor. Richard just stood there, his fists clenched, his face a mask of pure, impotent rage. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked to the front door and opened it wide. The cool evening air washed into the room. Out, I said one last time. Defeated. They began to move. A slow, shuffling funeral procession of their own making. Ethan stormed out without a backward glance. Richard shot me a look of such profound hatred, it was almost impressive. Before following him, Chloe had to be helped to her feet by her brother. Her body racked with theatrical sobs as he half-dragged her out onto the porch. I watched them go. Then I closed the door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was the sweetest, most liberating sound I had ever heard. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I breathed. It was a deep, shuddering breath that came from the very bottom of my lungs, releasing years of held tension, of quiet disappointment, of unspoken grief. The silence that filled the house now was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of peace, the silence of freedom. The next morning, the sun streamed through the kitchen window, and the light felt different. It felt cleaner. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the table, the lottery ticket now tucked safely away. I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a highly recommended financial lawyer. We set up a meeting to create an irrevocable trust. The second call was to the Community Foundation. I endowed a new scholarship fund in my wife's name, the Eleanor Memorial Scholarship, for nursing students at the local college. Her legacy wouldn't be in resentful children. It would be in the hands of young people dedicated to the kind of compassion she had embodied. I made a second, anonymous donation to the oncology wing of the hospital where she had spent her final days. The third call was to Aunt Carol. I told her a partial truth. I told her a small investment had paid off. And I wanted to share it with her. I had the lawyer set up an annuity for her that would ensure she would never have to worry about a single bill for the rest of her life. She cried, and I cried with her. They were tears of pure, uncomplicated joy. That evening, I took a chair out onto the front porch and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. My phone didn't ring. There were no texts filled with false apologies or veiled demands. The silence was complete. The $62 million sat in a bank. An abstract and meaningless number. But as I sat there, feeling the cool breeze on my face, I realized I was the richest man in the world. True wealth wasn't the money. It was this quiet, this peace, this hard-won, beautiful, and absolute freedom.